Live on DAZN Worldwide, April 26th, Eubank Jr. versus Ben. 30 years of rivalry and hatred.
I do hate him.
All comes down to this. The next generation, a new destroyer. For family, history, legacy. Eubank Jr. versus Ben, April 26th. Buy now at DAZN.com/boxing.
Alright, some interesting breaking news here. And this is by Everything Boxing on X. Now, they're quoting Dan Raphael. Now, Dan Raphael has already tweeted, I think it was over the weekend, that Shakur Stevenson has now signed with Lou DiBella. Eddie Hearn is adamantly refuting that. So I don't really know what to say with what he's basically, reporting, stuff like that. Everything Boxing are quoting him here. And he is reporting that, wait until you hear this. In fact, no, I'll read the news. I'll read the story. All right, I'll talk about that bit now in a sec. Dubois versus Chisora has now been ordered. So the IBF have now officially ordered their heavyweight champion Daniel Dubois to defend his title against mandatory challenger Derek Chisora next. I can't believe mandatory challenger and Derek Chisora are, I don't know. Dubois and Chisora have until May the 22nd to reach a deal, or purse bids will be ordered. Well, they're both Frank Warren fighters, so there shouldn't be an issue. Until purse bids are ordered, Dubois can appeal for an exemption to face Alexander Usyk. And when was the last IBF mandatory actually? When was the last IBF mandatory? I can't even remember. It's been a while ago. But that is the situation. Now, this is a strange one for me for a variety of reasons, right? One, I can't understand why the IBF a couple of years ago, when Filip Hrgović was meant to face, but he was actually meant to fight in the final eliminator, we just didn't know against who. Originally it was Michael Hunter, then I think it was Joe Parker, he went the other way as well. Then I think it was Bacoli, no, I think it was Yoka, but he'd already signed to fight Bacoli. So they had to keep going down and down and down and down and down until they got to Zhilei Zhang. And then they made that fight as a final eliminator, which was a good fight, don't get me wrong. And, Filip Hrgović obviously won very close. But they did all that rather than just go and pull the gun and make him mandatory. Now, with Derek Chisora, his fight against Otto Wallin, that was not a final eliminator. It was just that, an eliminator. An eliminator to get a reasonably high ranking with the IBF, but not to put him in line for a mandatory crack at Daniel Dubois. It was never that. Obviously, we knew going into the Chisora fight when he fought Wallin, that was early February. We knew the last crescendo card was coming, and we knew that Joseph Parker was actually going to face Daniel Dubois on that undercard for the IBF World Heavyweight title. Didn't happen. Dubois got ill. Fair enough. Something beginning with an S happens. In steps Martin Bacoli, who was set to face F.A. Ajagba in a final eliminator. He then forgoes that to face Joseph Parker, gets knocked out in 2 rounds. He is now still facing F.A. Ajagba, but it's no longer a final eliminator because he's foregone the right to challenge, or the right to have that final eliminator, as has Ajagba. So now they've just elevated Chisora to mandatory challenger. I don't think that's right. I think that, to me, shows inconsistencies with the IBF. And also, just to make things that little bit more confusing, only last week, they announced that they were ordering Frank Sanchez versus Filip Hrgović in a final eliminator. So what's going on here? Is Chisora the mandatory, or are the winners, respectively, of Sanchez versus Hrgović mandatory? Who are the mandatories? It's like, well, who's going to be mandatory? Is he mandatory now? And then if Dubois faces Usyk, he's mandatory for the winner of Usyk Dubois. And then what happens with Hrgović versus Sanchez when they fight? When will the winner... It makes no sense. It's like... I honestly don't know. It makes absolutely no sense what's going on with the IBF and their mandatory situation. But they have apparently ordered Chisora versus Daniel Dubois. Now, I suspect, obviously, the exemption he has is until... When is the exemption, actually? He has the exemption until the 22nd of May. So he's got roughly a month. So he's plenty of time to get that Usyk fight over the line. I would imagine it probably already is over the line. They're not going to announce it this week because of Ben Eubank. They'll probably announce it next week or the week after at some point. It's not going to happen, they're not going to do it. Sometimes that would happen, like with Joshua when he fought Povetkin, they announced Fury versus Wilder, but that was, rival promoters and all that, rival networks, so you understand that. Now everything is kind of more centralised with the Saudis, everyone's involved with them. So they very seldom do that on fight week, announce another big fight, because it does take the heat away from what's going on. But you would imagine Dubois is going to face Usyk. Then you're like, well, what does Chisora do? Because he's mandatory. That's not going to change. Does he wait it out? Does he fight again? I still can't believe he's mandatory. I still can't believe that in 2025, and although he's had a good run of form over the last couple of years, he's only lost, in the last 3 years, he's only lost one fight, and that was for the World Heavyweight title against Tyson Fury. In fairness, right? We have to be fair on that one. And yeah, a win over Joe Joyce isn't bad. A win over Otto Wallin at one point wouldn't have been bad, but maybe it will turn out to be he only beat Otto Wallin win, and maybe it already is that. Nevertheless, he still had a decent run of form over the last year, 2 years, thereabouts. I still don't think he should. Look, Chisora versus Dubois, say there was a catastrophic breakdown in negotiations for the Usyk fight, and Daniel Dubois fought there at Chisora. I would genuinely fear for Chisora's health in that fight, because he'd never be able to keep Dubois off him, I would imagine, and he would take an absolute shellacking in there against an aggressive, young, very, very powerful Daniel Dubois. I think Chisora really should look at this whole situation. He's IBF mandatory. That's a great way to go out. And if you must have that 50th fight, have it against Dillian Whyte. Man, Dillian Whyte could not even put a dent in an ancient and slow as molasses and just god-awful Ebenezer Tete. Couldn't put a dent in him. Had some competitive rounds in that fight. Fraser Clark, who was seen as a domestic level fighter and was brutally knocked out the fight before, man, he would have sweated more in the steam room than he did that night. Seriously, he should just fight Dillian Whyte in the trilogy fight. Best chance now than ever to win it. Probably stop Dillian Whyte and just sail off into the sunset. Because Chisora now runs the risk of, he's already damaged. You can hear it in him. It's not a case if he could get... No, he is damaged. It's just the case of how much is he going to exacerbate that damage. Is it going to be a case of in 10 years, 15 years, you can still hear in his voice that it's not quite there. You know, he's not like Thomas Hearns punch drunk or anything like that yet. But you can hear the deterioration in his speech. If he carries on fighting, especially someone like Dubois, that could be irreversible at that point. So by the time he gets to... He's 40-something now. By the time he gets to 60, it could be... You know me out. And I don't think all the money in the world would be able to make up for that. So, yeah, I would say to Chisora, it's nice it is to be IBF mandatory. Just take the trilogy fight with Dillian Whyte if it's there on the table, if that can be done. Have it in the O2, have it in Zimbabwe. Beat Dillian Whyte, because he'll beat Dillian Whyte at this point. Dillian Whyte is shot to bits and sail off into the sunset. As for this, and again, it's so confusing with this whole IBF situation. Chisora's mandatory, but there's a final eliminator order between Hrgovic and Sanchez. So who's mandatory then? If Hrgovic beats Sanchez, which one of them is mandatory? And then will the IBF champion have to do back-to-back mandatories? All right, you beat one mandatory, here's another one. You know, it makes no sense. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed the video, people. Smash the like button. As always, hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, peace.